All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first in a series of many interviews to be featured on the channel here for the month of December. Sitting here with a man, many monikers. You may know him as GQ Money, Wrestling Society X, Fabian Kalin, the artist now known as Smiley.
Yep. Down to TNA, devilishly handsome, Rack Rixelplix, Ringside Ryan, the names go on and on forever.
We are here outside what used to be the Grand Olympic Auditorium, a place that I know has many memories for you, the old XPW hallowed halls, if you will.
Yeah.
Go ahead and take us back, if you will, and tell us what brought you into pro wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, it's crazy sitting out here. It's a whole new environment that it used to be. When we used to come in here parking and have all the fans lined up on the fence with their signs and their weapons, and now we have Jesus with his hands out to everybody. So times have definitely changed in the last 10 years or so here at the New Glory Church of Jesus Christ, or whatever it's called, right. As opposed to the Grand Olympic. Man, getting into wrestling, I got into wrestling when I was like 2 or 3 years old. My mom actually got me into it. I used to wake up every Saturday, Sunday morning, jump into my parents' bed and go watch a little NWA, a little AWA, and even a little WWF. But even back then, NWA, AWA was definitely better than the goofy, cartoony WWF back then. I never jumped on the old Hulk Hogan bandwagon as a kid. I was definitely into much more of the Raw style, and even as a WWF fan, it was all about the Macho Man. Hogan can go stick it. It was all about, ooh yeah!
Okay. What made you decide to get into wrestling as a career? I mean, did you want to do it from the minute you started seeing it? Or?
I probably would say I always wanted to do it, but never thought it would ever be a possibility. I mean, I was always a small little guy, smallest guy in my class, smallest guy at school kind of thing. So it was something that, you see wrestling on TV, especially back then. We're going back 30 years at that point, 25, 30 years, that wrestlers were larger than life. They were monsters. I mean, it wasn't that they were ripped muscle beasts, but that they were big, monstrous, larger than life personalities. I mean, Hercules Hernandez, and I mean, even Billy Jack Haynes. I mean, all these guys were big. So as a little scrawny kid, it was something that would never cross my mind that I'd ever have the opportunity to pursue. But at the same time, through junior high, even elementary school, I mean, anytime the crash mats were out, if there was something in gym class that needed mats, if it was gymnastics, I mean, wrestling moves. It was all about doing moves and hitting big things and trying to have fun. In junior high, I got into amateur style wrestling. I knew that it had nothing to do with pro wrestling, that they weren't similar, they weren't the same, but there was that little bit inside of you that was like, well, if I can be a wrestler, there's the connection. It's just like pro wrestling, even though it's different. And so even in my amateur wrestling, as I got through high school, I was the captain of my team junior and senior year, varsity, all that. I brought pro wrestling flair to my amateur wrestling even in high school. I mean, I painted a skull and crossbone on my knee pads. I had sparkling shoelaces on my shoes. When our team would come out for warm-ups, we brought this big giant skull on a stick, like this voodoo stick, until our coach said, you guys can't do that, it's ridiculous. But we always tried to, even back then when it was serious sport, and I took it, I mean, it was my life of the actual athleticism and pursuing to try to be the best, that we still brought that theatrics and fun and glitz and glamour that pro wrestling gives. I mean, all I could say is I was always attracted to it. I mean, it was just so awesome. I mean, wrestling has everything. It has the action. It has the drama. It has the characters and personalities. It has the stunts. I mean, for a little guy who likes, his attention, ADD, who likes fast-paced, rapid-fire stuff, wrestling had it all. I mean, every single thing you wanted.
The pyrotechnics, the women.
Everything. I mean, who wasn't a Miss Elizabeth fan back then? I mean, you couldn't help but be attracted to what it was. I mean, 93,000 people watching, or whatever the number is, on WrestleMania 3. I mean, it was what it was, and it was awesome.
How did you get into the professional wrestling business?
When I was in college, I was hosting a radio show on our radio station, University of Colorado. I started up Ringside with Ringside, wrestling talk show / soap opera. Instead of just talking wrestling, what we like to do is we took our episode and we split it up, and we actually created a little on-air soap opera. We scripted out stuff, had our own characters based on the drama of the radio station and the executive committee and the decisions they had, and then we'd get into verbal spats, and we even had, quote, matches on air, where we'd take the we'd take the noise from a wrestling video game at the time, do some stuff, and then just add VO tracks and make it like we were really doing stuff.
Awesome.
As that was going on, and it was going real well, and the newspapers were starting to cover it. It was getting some buzz. I was getting some cool guests on the show. Had Foley on the show. Had Chris Candido on the show. As it was getting cool, I'm flipping through the paper one day in Boulder, and I see this ad for some guys who were sending people to wrestling school. And trying people out for wrestling school. Called them up. I said, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this on the air. Maybe there's other people who want to get into it. Give you a chance. We worked out this bit where we were I was gonna start, me not being a part of the business yet, and insult them, the fakeness of wrestling, this and that, and then the whole thing was supposed to be they were gonna beat me up on air. There was all the noise, the banging, the the sizzling, everything's going wrong on the system. The guy, when we were doing that, ended up swearing on air, and I was already on probation with my station for bootlegging a Roots concert and using the station's name, for my credentials when I was trying to get out of being in trouble. So I was on probation. They swore. I got kicked off the air. So about 2 weeks later, they called me up. They felt really bad about it, and they're like, we were sending people, we were doing these tryouts and sending people to Florida to go to Steve Kern's school. The guys who were doing it were Big Nasty Bobby Black and Dan Magnum Man Magnus. Bobby was trained by Steve Kern at the School of Hard Knocks in Florida, so he was actually just kind of being a liaison and a recruiter for Kern and sending guys down there. After they had met me and saw that, the kind of spokesperson I can be, they were like, why don't we start something out here in Denver together? And it started right like that. We started up a school, we started up a promotion, and it took off like wildfire around Denver. I mean, there were currently like 2 other indie feds there, and I had never seen indie wrestling actually at that point. I just TV wrestling at that point. And AWA was running a small little thing, and Rocky Mountain Championship Wrestling, who I think is actually still around somehow. And they actually bragged that they've lasted longer than my old fed, and it was like, well, you can still combine all your shows the last 10 years, and I don't think you still have the same crowd numbers that we drew. But like this AWA show, so the first indie show I went to was down in Market Street in Denver, and it was AWA was doing a show, and it was my first experience with indie wrestling, and there must have been 20 people in attendance, and they advertised a steel cage match, and instead of a real steel cage match, they brought out one piece of caging and leaned it up against the ring, and it was that you can use the caging in your match. And then, so it was like that. And then there was this other dude who was wearing a mask, and the minute he hit the ring, he started puking through his mask, and then he's lifting it, and he just kept puking in the ring. And I'm sitting there next to my partner going, wow, if this is what, the wrestling scene is here, we're going to dominate this. Yeah. And we did. So they were doing these 20-person crowds. Our first show, I think we drew 471 or something like that.
It's not bad for a first show.
And we never used name talent either. It was all self-created talent. And the numbers kept going. We went from like 470 to 600 to 750 to 900. And then we moved into a bigger venue and brought Roddy Piper in and did like 1,500, 1,600 people and stuff. But it took off. I mean, the Denver media was loving us. We had huge articles in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News. The WB Channel 2 came and did live remotes from the gym to advertise our St. Patty's Day Massacre and this and that. They also, aside from their morning show that did that like months previous, their nighttime hard news show, ended up doing a story on our school that we making dreams come true for people. The NBC affiliate had a show called Show with Greg Moody. They covered us, and it was fantastic. I ended up even doing a political roundtable discussion on the PBS channel down in Denver, that they brought me in as a young promoter, like give my views on World Denver, whatever it was. But I mean, it was just getting so awesome and growing, and everything was really cool. Problem is at that point, once it grows that much, both partners started having different interests. So where I was still about trying to make this thing the biggest, the best bet it can be and grow it to really try to make an impact in the wrestling world, he at that point was worried about getting his girlfriend signed to WWE, and focus has changed. At that point I was like, we have a difference of opinion on how we like to do stuff. Anyone who's worked with me knows I'm a little bit stubborn, and I like to do stuff my way in a lot of things. So, we had a fallout, and it was time for us to end it. So I ended up leaving that fed, and I will say they never had the same success after that. But, that's not necessarily because of me. Just times had changed. Right. But at that point, I started pursuing, where was I going to go? How was I going to continue my wrestling career? So I sent some packages down to OVW, and I sent some packages to UPW and XPW. UPW and XPW both had interest. I never heard anything back from Cornette and OVW back then. So I decided to take a drive out to California to go see what it was all about and see if I maybe had a future out here. Took this monstrous drive from Colorado, had to stop through Salt Lake. We'll just go. As I'm driving through, my car breaks down in Green River, Utah. 100 miles out from, like, it was hard. I haven't had to get a tow truck for like 100 miles, sitting with the tow truck driver for that. In the end, I had these interviews set up, and I didn't want to miss that. I was like, these are my opportunities. So I ended up having to get a plane ticket from Salt Lake to LA, rent a car. It became this massive expense. I went down and I met with UPW first. I met with UPW first. Saw one of their shows, and it was cool. It was very cookie cutter. It was plain. It was, it was like I could see myself getting involved with them, but it didn't necessarily excite me. And I was like, eh. So then when, like, after seeing the show, I had my meeting with this guy Roger, who was the head of production with them, and met with Bassman a little bit also. And they wanted me to work like 40 hours, like, quote, interning, because remember, I wasn't just going as talent. I'm into the production and the behind the scenes as well. So they wanted me to work 40 hours a week for them for no pay. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I have no problem giving you guys effort, putting in the extra effort, and, and giving you some time. But to go say that that's what you need from me, I mean, that was asinine and ridiculous. So at that point, I then drove up to the Valley, met with Klein Rock, and, was gonna go meet Rob Black. This is when they were doing their San Bernardino Metal Fest show that weekend. So I meet with Kevin, and Kevin's cool, and they're super interested, and it's the kind of thing where they're telling me, we don't have the budget, since you're not a name guy, to fly you out for shows. But if you lived out here, we're definitely interested in working with you and would like to have you part of the team if you're interested in relocating. They weren't going to relocate me, but if I was going to make that move, they were interested. So they tell me to come see the Metal Fest show, just so I can get a live idea of the product. I drive with my friend Casey up to San Bernardino, an hour and a half or whatever. He was down in Torrance, so it was a couple hours at that point. And Kevin never left me tickets at the window. Now, personally, I wouldn't have had an issue. I would have just bought the ticket, but my friend Casey didn't want to spend the $40 for an XPW ticket because XPW always got premium prices. He didn't want to spend the money, so we left. And as we're driving back, I'm sitting there going, wow, what an unprofessional company. I'll never work for these guys. What scumbags, what assholes. And that was that. And I'm like, wow, what am I going to do now? Nothing panned out. About a month later, I'm up in Aspen with my family. I'm on the chairlift. And I'm actually, at this point, I'm thinking I might be moving home with my parents. Like, my parents are actually expecting at the end of this vacation, I'm going to go back to Denver, I'm going to load up the car, I'm going to drive home, move in with them, start my life, get a real job, blah, 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 blah. The day before that was supposed to happen, the vacation was ending, I got a call from my buddy Scott, who we called the Giant. He was actually a 7-foot stud out in Denver, 7 foot tall, big monster guy. He actually ended up in XPW. And he says, dude, let's go to XPW. And I was like, man, Scott, it wasn't a good experience. He's like, screw it, let's just go together. Well, we'll just move out. So me and Scott took another drive. We went and did that. And I had a Mitsubishi Eclipse Spider at the time, Eclipse convertible. And I thought me and Scott were going to split the driving to California. But Scott couldn't fit in my driver's seat. He couldn't get in the driver's seat. So I had to freaking drive the whole way. We went out there. It was the January XPW show. I want to say, I think it's Payback's a Bitch. It was when Vic and New Jack I don't know which one debuted. It was when Vic and New Jack first debuted. And so I'm sitting there in the bleachers before the show starts. And like me, I mean, I go to shows, I'm in my suit, and I'm looking like I am. And Lizzie Borden walks up to me, and she just puts her hand out, and she's like, oh, you must be GQ Money. I was like, huh? And I had no idea. Apparently, they had already been talking about me, and boom. That was that. Like, I was GQ Money. Me and Scott said, let's do it. We moved out here permanently. Also brought along TJ Rush from Colorado, and that started that. Now, to make things even crazier, like when it comes to like full-time jobs, Kevin says to us, me, Scott, and Terry, TJ, are sitting at a table with Kevin having a little meeting, talking about jobs. Like, so wrestling's one thing, you'll make some money in XPW, but like we wanted full-time jobs. We just moved out here. Kevin's like, I got 2 jobs, a receptionist job and a warehouse job. And he's looking at me and Scott, thinking Scott being this big guy is going to work the warehouse, and me being this talker that I am is going to be the receptionist. And I sit and I look at Scott and I look at TJ, and I'm like, you guys want those? So Scott ended up taking the receptionist job, and TJ ends up taking the warehouse job, and I'm without a job thinking, I'm new to Hollywood, I'm going to go try to make it as a star and go do my thing. A month or 2 months go by, still haven't gotten a job. Said to Scott, dude, set me up a meeting with Rob. I walked into Rob with the pizza in my hand, you know, wearing my suit, looking my look, and said, you know, and he ended up hiring me, and from there on we have history, and I've, you know, been with Rob for a lot of years since then.
Right on. What ended up leading you through XPW into forming the Enterprise? How did that all come about?
Man, I mean, that's strictly a Rob and Kevin thing at that point. So at that point, I really had no say on what was going on. There was actually a point where they wanted me to be in a tag. I think they were going to, even though they were calling me GQ Money already, that they were contemplating putting me in a tag team as a worker. It was going to be me and You Suicide, or Lone Star, You Suicide from WSX. They wanted to put us together as the team Ultraviolence and have us both do the Clockwork Orange gimmick together. And at that point, I kind of looked at them and I said, you know, I really don't want to be a wrestler. I want to be a manager and a mouthpiece, you know. And the main reason when I always do that and say that is just I know my role and I know my size. So I realized that wrestling has become accessible to the little guys. But just because it's accessible doesn't mean that I think everyone should be little. I mean, I still believe wrestlers should be big, larger-than-life characters. So I always say I knew my role in that, yeah, I was a worker, and even back then, I mean, I was pretty good. Could have definitely been better, could have learned more, but for being what I'll pretty much call self-taught, you know, I ended up being pretty good, and people were usually impressed with my skills. I remember even on the first XPW tryout we did, you know, me, Scott, and TJ got in the ring, worked around a little bit, and I just remember Supreme saying to Chaos or saying to Rob, the little guy's good. So, you know, it was that kind of thing, but once again, I knew as a manager, I can still be good. I can still take the bumps. I can still be put in gimmick matches, have those kinds of situations. So they knew, Rob and Kevin knew that they were starting the Enterprise. They had Rosano going in, and it was all supposed to be focused around Steve Rosano. At that point, they signed Veronica Kane, Extreme Associates parent company, signed her to an adult contract. In doing so, that also meant she was going to be a part of XPW. And they knew that the Enterprise was going to be Veronica and Rosano. And then they brought TJ in as this motivational speaker. And here I am. I'm like, wow, I'm the one that you guys are interested in, and I still don't have a role. And, you know, nothing's going on. And they're trying to think of how they're going to get me in. And then finally, one day, they were like, screw it. We'll put you in the Enterprise also. So from there, it was still, once again, supposed to be about Veronica and Rosano, and pretty much from my first promo, kind of changed a little bit. Then we did the Pursuit of Chaos, you know, for the storyline purposes of bringing our true star player. Rosano kind of got pushed to the back burner a little bit. It became all about, at that point, me and Chaos and Veronica. I mean, even TJ kind of got, he was there and he was involved, but he was still, you know, back focused, and it became really about the trio of me, Chaos, and Veronica, the agent, the manager, and the wrestler. And man, it just became fun right away. I mean, at that point, that's when I started being able to have a little creative say there, and we got to just have fun and do lots of cool things. And
it always seemed like you guys were having fun. I wasn't into the XPW products back then when it was actually happening. A friend of mine introduced me to the Best of the Enterprise DVD, and I could see all the fun you guys were having. I started getting some XPW backlog DVDs and stuff, and it's like,
see, even with that DVD, Best of the Enterprise, like, we wanted the Enterprise wanted to be different. Like, if you look at every XPW DVD, it was an edited version of the show, or some clips of the show. I mean, and we wanted that DVD to come off totally different, where it's much more edited, it's much more montage, and we were like, we just want it to be rapid fire once again, and different than what you're used to. Throw a little more skit and shtick, and really get over our personalities of who we were, which was, at that point, the most, you know, dominant faction in I'd even say indie wrestling, not just XPW. I mean, we talked the talk and we backed it up.
How long after XPW folded, you know, were you kind of just wandering aimlessly, so to speak, before you found your next big thing, which I believe was WSX? There
was a transition between that. I actually went to TNA for a little while.
That's right.
The Pittsburgh show. So XPW did their show in Pittsburgh. Shane Douglas set up to do Pittsburgh. And we started doing that show. And at that point, once I got there, the writing was on the wall that XPW was dying. And that's when, you know, I was kind of talking to Chaos about we got to try to find some other options. At that point, I started getting on the phone with Vince Russo, because Rob was actually at one point when we got to Philly trying to see if we can get Russo into XPW at that point. But you know, Rob, in doing so, was putting over my name, so I know that Russo had heard the Smiley name a bunch then in that phone call, or a couple phone calls. So at that point, I called up Russo. I was like, hey, it's Smiley, Rob's right-hand guy. I'm looking for something else. And he kind of gave me the, okay, we'll see what happens. Let's figure something out and get back to me soon. At that point, I know that Russo called Shane Douglas, to find out some info about me. And at that point, Russo never returned my phone calls again. So at this point, we came back from Pittsburgh and did the final LA shows at X Park, at the paintball. Actually, I take it back. The X Park was right before Pittsburgh, because that's when me and Chaos got in the fight with X-Pac in the locker room, because X-Pac came to the show high as hell wearing China's pants. And, and there was a big shoving match. I mean, it wasn't like a big fist fight. There was a shoving match in the back, a lot of yelling and screaming. I guess, X-Pac claimed Chaos took a cheap shot at him in the ring. Could have been Chaos was jealous of losing, upset and bitter about having to drop the belt. Because it wasn't that Chaos had issues with dropping the belt. It was Chaos had issues dropping the belt to X-Pac, a guy who we knew would be unreliable for the company. Yeah. So it had nothing to do that Chaos didn't want to lose, or the ego was so big that we had problems with losing the belt. It was to X-Pac, who came out of nowhere, who we knew wasn't going to be, reliable, and that was proved after those LA shows. So that's what happened. So finally the fight ends in the back, and X-Pac and Chaos and me, we're all having this conversation about how this is good because the Real Emotion's going to bring an amazing match next month, whatever it was in Pittsburgh, and we'll bring that to the to the match, and then the people will feel it, and it'll be real, and they'll love it, and yada yada yada. And then X-Pac doesn't show up to Pittsburgh at all. I remember I'm dressed, because that was the show I came out as X-Cock. I put on the costume. And I remember walking through the curtain, X-Pac's music hits, and I come through the curtain, and I just remember hearing the people in the crowd go, man, X-Pac got fat and short. And then at that point they realized it was me, and we had the whole thing. But even in the back, I mean, Just Incredible, from behind when I had the wig on, like taps me on the shoulder. He's like, oh, you finally made it. I turn around, he's like, oh, get out of here. I thought you were Sean. At that point we knew it was over, and we had to start looking for something. So, in fact, we flew back from Pittsburgh, and I actually got a letter from Rob in my email at that point saying I was fired, which was fine because at that point I was quitting as well. I mean, fired technically, which is great because it allowed me to get unemployment. Technically, I would have quit anyways. I mean, we were done. Essentially, I knew XPW as a company was folding, and I worked for the porn company really as a means to an end to make the wrestling work out. And the minute that the wrestling wasn't there, I had no interest in working for the porn company anymore. So it was time to change it up. Finally, me and Chaos say, let's move to Nashville. It's the same thing as XPW. I knew from my experience they weren't going to fly us in. We weren't superstars as big in our heads as we wanted to think we were, that we were this awesome faction out in the West Coast. And in XPW, we were still small potatoes in the real world sense of the wrestling industry. So it was like, why don't we move out there and try to make a go at it? So we brought along a couple of friends. So we went out. It was myself, Lizzie Valentine, J-Love, Chaos and his girlfriend, and then we picked up my buddy Smokey Carmichael in Denver. We figured if we had 5 of us together, however many it was, we'd go live there, we'd make the expenses really cheap, and we'd make it work. We'd work a commune-style communist, like everyone chips in and just makes it work for all of us. The moment we got there, man, within the first day of being in Nashville, Joey didn't get along with my girlfriend, I didn't get along with his girlfriend, and our friendship just disintegrated.
We'll go ahead and catch you right there. Again, the wrap-up signal, we're about to run out of tape here, so we're going to turn it over to Jeff for part 2.
I talk a lot.
Thank you very much.